So reading in 2 Kings chapter 17 today, I was struck by God's people just being besieged repeatedly and then taken and sent into exile in foreign lands. And then it says that it was because of their sin against the Lord. So this was a form of the judgment that God had on his people, not to punish, not to inflict pain upon them, but to, just like any good parent, to discipline them and remind them of their need to be fully devoted to him. And the sin that the people had done, the evil that they had done in God's eyes, it's interesting. So as we read that story, it says that they feared God. Like, the fear of God, that's the thing that I always want to make sure I have. Not like I'm afraid, but a fear of like a really healthy reverence, a fear in the sense of the way that you would not want to step out of line with your mother or your father, the way that you would defer to them as opposed to your own thoughts. So there's, on one hand, that they have a fear of God. They feared the Lord, it said in multiple occasions. But they also served other gods. They also, paid tributes to other authorities outside of the kingdom of God. They also celebrated and worshipped carved images. So it's a simple thought that the Lord is just reminding me today, and I should not be surprised by this as I've been studying, passages in Isaiah, like Isaiah 58, Micah 6, Amos 5. At least I think it's 5. But in Amos, Micah, and Isaiah, one theme we saw repeated there is not that there was a problem that they were worshiping. It was like, yes, they worshiped God. In each one of those stories, these people were worshiping God. And yet, they neglected justice. So God had that against them, and God was not receiving their worship. So in this regard, in 2 Kings here, yes, they're fearing the Lord, but not solely. And they were offering worship and praise and honor to other gods. And God will not share devotion with another. God does not want a piece of our worship. He is not satisfied with half, 75, 95% of our heart. If we're not fully devoted, if it's not worshiping him alone, then it is considered evil in his sight. That was one of the things that I just was struck by. All throughout there it said that, so it was talking about this king that was taking over, and that I want to say it was Hosea, that he had done evil in the sight of God. And it was not evil like the ones before him, not like the other kings before him, and yet it was still evil. And then it goes on to say that, he led the people to fear God, to fear the Lord. And it's well, how's that evil? Because they still worshipped other gods. So we got to understand that this is why we so desperately need Jesus. Because we serve an all or nothing God. If you're not fully devoted, if you're not 100% in, then that's not satisfying this holy and perfect God. And that's why we so desperately need. And if you're in the church, your foundation must be the grace that we received and poured out upon us through the work Jesus did on the cross. That he finished the incomplete nature of our worship. He he bridged the gap between they feared the Lord and they worshipped other gods. He bridged the gap. He knew that we would need that. And that is not a license to continue our double-mindedness, our duplicitous nature. That is not a license to continue to be half in, to be lukewarm, to call it balance when we aren't fully devoted. But that is simply the parachute that saves us from this plunge, this death-inducing fall that we've all succumbed to. So we need to recognize that we are falling, we have fallen, and we will continue to fall, and seek Jesus as our rescue and as our way forward and our way out. And what would be interesting, I know I just talked about Jesus as a parachute to rescue us. What if in his transformative nature, that it's not just a parachute to keep us from plunging to the ground and going splat, but what if his parachute becomes a parasail, and through his grace and mercy, we are now able to fly to higher heights. We are able to soar on wings like eagles. So I think the question we have is, while we have the grace of Jesus resting on us, rescuing us, and causing us to soar, are we willing to tear down the high places? Are we willing to crash to the ground the carved images? Are we willing to give God what is only his, our full devotion, to fear him alone? So check your heart, check the idols, check for the places where, rather than doing what God says, you start to compromise. And there's so much of that in our country today, in my heart right now. Political idols, idols of wealth and prosperity, idols of the public opinion, the fear of man being louder in my head than the fear of God. Check your heart. Check for those places that cause you to rethink what God said and to consider going another way. Those are places where you are trying to share worship that God will not share. All right, y'all. Be blessed and be a blessing. Peace.